Hi, everyone. I'm Doug DeVos, and welcome back to Believe. My guest today is Elise Westhoff. She's CEO of the Philanthropy Roundtable, which helps Americans support worthy causes. So we want to know, does America need charity? What good does it do? And why do some people want to control how other people give and what they give to? These are questions that matter for the most generous country on earth. So now, let's see what Elise Westhoff believes.
We believe, and have always believed, in this country that man was created in the image of God, that he was given talents and responsibilities and was instructed to use them to make this world a better place in which to live. And you see, this is the really great thing of America.
It's time to discover what binds us together, and finding it has the power to transform our world. That's what I believe. How about you? Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Believe. I'm Doug DeVos, and we're honored to have you join us again today. Today's topic is about charity, charitable giving. Why does America need it? What do we understand or don't understand about it? It's a big industry, if you will. It touches a lot of our hearts in many different ways, and it touches a lot of people in our country. So why is it important? Why is it so important in the United States? There's something about America and about our history that has set us apart, really, from many others in the world. And we've had a leadership position in charitable giving. What does that mean for us? And the fact that we may hear about certain people giving a lot of money doesn't take away at all from the amazing voluntary and giving nature of Americans across the country, from all different backgrounds and all different walks of life, because giving isn't just money, it's time and talent as well, in addition to some treasure. So we have a lot of people who are involved, but the numbers are showing that some of the people getting involved are declining slightly, but the giving is increasing slightly. So there's a few dynamics. Of course, the past couple of years there have been a lot of dynamics in our country, so maybe we can talk about that, because if we're going to talk about it, we need somebody who's an expert in this field and in this space. And so we are honored to have Elise Westhoff with us, because she knows not just a lot about philanthropy. She is the president and CEO of the Philanthropy Roundtable, and has spent her time and her life and her career involved in this space, understanding it, and is incredibly knowledgeable, not only herself, but in helping to share that knowledge with others as they think about giving as well. And Elise has also been connected very much in how we give, not only the act of giving, but the study of it. And increasingly, because giving is a tax-deductible activity, I guess additionally the public policy aspects of it as well. So Elise, welcome. We are thrilled to have you join us. Thank you for taking some time to join us here on Believe.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Doug.
So let me just start with, tell us a little bit, Elise, about the Philanthropy Roundtable. What is that for our listeners and our audience?
Well, the Philanthropy Roundtable is a network of donors who share values. We believe in a strong civil society that's based on liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility. And we try to advance those values through effective charitable giving. And we also believe that in order to do that well, we need to protect donors' right to give how, when, and where they choose. So we call that philanthropic freedom, and we advocate for that as well. We have lots of donors, all different types of donors across the spectrum, but all of them share our core beliefs in those values that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So getting people together to talk about giving is important, because it's hard to figure out where to give, how to give, whether you're in your community, whether it's your time and you want to volunteer, where to go, lots of opportunities, whether you want to give $10 or $100 or more. You may see something, an advertisement on TV. You'd think giving is easy, but it isn't, is it? Tell us a little bit about what people have to go through to think about giving or to just give well.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because go back a little bit to my own journey. I worked in education and in mental health on the nonprofit side, and had the opportunity to then work for a family foundation and help give away money on the grant making side. And it was so interesting because I thought going in, well, you just write a check. How hard can it be? And as anyone who has been involved in the work of philanthropy knows, it's actually, incredibly difficult to make those decisions. I think, everyone who's involved in this really has to think about their values and how those and their passions, and really try to identify the organizations that not only share their values and really relate to those passions, but also are effective at what they do. Well-run organizations with strong leadership that are financially solid, with great governance. It's quite a task. And I think, the roundtable to me, when I was running that family foundation, the Snyder Foundation, was such a huge resource. Finding the community of people who share your values and you can exchange ideas with and talk about effective ways of giving was really invaluable to me. And I know it is to a lot of people in our community as well.
Yeah, it is a great challenge in learning and listening and talking to each other about finding the right places that match your values, your passions, because giving of your time, talent, and treasure is really an expression of what you believe, which is kind of, the title of our show here, and why we're talking about this topic, because it is an expression of what you believe and what you feel about things. So Elise, let me kind of go back a little bit bigger picture. Help us understand, I mentioned it earlier, but help us understand how America developed this sense of giving, and some of the numbers about where we are as a country, as a society, what role that giving or charity plays for us. Can you help us get a big picture of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, America is the most generous country in the world. And, this country was built on the idea of private solutions, voluntary action to solve problems. And so to see that America has continued that tradition over many, many, many years is, I think, really inspiring. To your point earlier, there are a lot of people who look at the trends and the way things are going in philanthropy. Last year, or 2020, now that we're in 2022 officially, was a record-breaking year in charitable giving. So we saw nearly $500 billion going to charitable causes. And all of this was in the midst of a lot of economic uncertainty, people not knowing exactly what was going to happen to their own wallets. But it really showed people were willing to step up and be generous despite all of that uncertainty, because we're built on that idea of neighbor helping neighbor. And that's the way we approach things. I think if you go to other countries, you see much more of a heavy reliance on government solving problems and sort of top-down one-size-fits-all solutions. America is built on, local communities finding solutions to problems, and also the private sector really thriving. So to your point earlier, yes, we're concerned about getting more households involved in the idea of, both giving charitably, volunteering, helping their neighbors, building a sense of community, which I think has been a struggle during the pandemic, frankly. But we do see people stepping up and helping one another in lots of different ways. And that was a real inspiration during the pandemic, I think. And I think it will continue.
Yeah. What a great thing for us to remember in a time of a lot of division or fear, that people stepped up. They thought about their neighbors, even when there was risk or unknowns about themselves. And so help us understand some of the ways you touched on it earlier. How does charity or giving actually help somebody? And what are the things that we should be thinking about in the ways? Because you can give, there's a disaster, you give to certainly, just immediate relief. You mentioned just in your last answer there, talk about a sense of belonging, and building community. But then there's also things of helping people realize their potential. So maybe you can expand on some of those things of how charity or can really touch somebody's life.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is the key to effective charitable giving, is thinking about how we can empower each individual to reach their unique potential. And, the government, again, is, a place where it's really not set up to help equip people to do that, nor is it meant to do that. And I think that's why we see the importance of charitable institutions and really being those local organizations that serve unique needs of each community and think about how we can help people help themselves. Thinking about equipping them with the tools they need long term to really overcome challenges. Thinking about education, workforce development, and also the policy framework we need in our society to eliminate barriers to success and achieving success. So, at the roundtable, that's how we think about it. We think about the things that make up a free society, again, this nation was built on the idea of a free society, but also one that where neighbors help neighbors. And that's where charity comes in. So we try to promote America's founding principles, promoting pathways to opportunity for every person, and really building those strong communities that help people reach their unique potential.
Yeah. That well said there. You've touched on, and we started with this idea that America's a generous country, and you touched on founding principles. Can you help us maybe make the connection? What is it about those founding principles that led to America, being in this role and being so charitable, if you will? Now, we may watch the news, and you may not see a lot of charity that happens on the news, but thankfully, no matter what the broadcast, every once in a while, they'll have a good news story about somebody doing something. But if you go back to, what is it about our culture? What was it about our founding that helped either create or expanded this idea that neighbors should help neighbors, and that if you're successful, look around and do something helpful rather than waiting for somebody else to be part of the solution?
Yeah, well, I love history, and I love reading about our founding, because our founders were really just incredible human beings, enlightened human beings. They were not perfect, of course, and we've heard a lot about that in the last couple of years.
Nobody's perfect, right? None of us are perfect.
None of us are perfect, but they came to this country with the idea of this experiment of people having the freedom to pursue their dreams. And it was really a unique idea that, that your place of birth or your, who you were wasn't going to determine your station in life. Like, this was built on, not everyone had access to the opportunity at the time. As a woman, I could say, like, women didn't have that full access, and
right.
Other people didn't either. But I think they set us up for the idea that any person from any background, with any skin color, with any gender, can rise in America. And that's, again, that's what this country is founded on, that idea, that belief. And not everyone is born with the same opportunity, right? And so I think that's what really inspires me about philanthropy and about charitable institutions, is that they can help really provide those pathways to opportunity for every person to achieve the American dream. That's what this country is all about. And that's what makes it, I think, the greatest country in the world. And I feel privileged every day, I'm sure you do as well, to live here.
Sure, absolutely. We've had some previous episodes where we talked about the American dream and people coming with nothing and being able to have a chance to be successful. And we know that there were barriers placed for people to have that throughout the country's history, and that our history is one of trying to identify and figure that out and take down some of those barriers. And again, we don't have a perfect history or perfect track record by any means. I don't mean to advocate that, but for some reason, we've been able to create this level of culture where this idea of the American dream has come through. And one of the elements, whenever you talk to somebody, especially somebody who came to America from somewhere else, young and impoverished, and they become successful, they are very focused in giving. And in fact, those who have generated, in my experience, great success have been really focused on figuring out how to share it and how to give it. And that's why an organization like the Philanthropy Roundtable and in your role as the CEO is so important because I've seen people who would older people, who I would go to and very successful and say, why are you working so hard? And they say, well, I made a lot of promises to give money away, so I got to keep making enough to fulfill those promises that I made, and it became a very important part of their life. So maybe tell us a little bit about that idea of connecting the American dream with giving and the role that it has as an individual versus the role that maybe you wait for somebody else, whether it's the government or some other charity that may be a little further away from your neighbor. That idea of stepping in there and helping on their own.
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more. I just am so inspired by our community of philanthropists. They're some of the most generous people I have ever met. And it's interesting to hear some of the narratives that we hear out there about philanthropists not being so positive, right? And thinking that people are in it for themselves, or that, they're only giving because for tax reasons, or they're hoarding their money. I mean, that is so far from the truth and so far from what we see in our philanthropists. And I think you're right. So many people, especially people who have come to this country with nothing, or even were born here and overcame incredible challenges to build a business, to build a career or a life, and live a meaningful life in America. They truly and genuinely want to see other people experience that and reach that. And that doesn't necessarily mean becoming a billionaire, right? Not everybody
Right.
needs to be a billionaire or wants to be a billionaire. That's part of the American dream too, is saying you have the right and the opportunity to choose the life you want to live. And that may mean that you live in a humble home in rural Indiana and, are involved with your church and spend a lot of time with your family. And that's what makes you happy. And I think, again, going back to our founding principles, the right to pursue the life you want to lead is so fundamental. So when I hear people today saying, talking about redistribution of wealth or that everyone should sort of live their life in a certain way, I totally reject that. That's part of the American dream, is saying this is what I choose for myself and for my family, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. But everyone should have the opportunity to pursue the life they want to lead, and that could mean getting more education, or just breaking down the barriers that people have to success and opportunity. And we definitely want to do that, but we also want to respect people's choices to live different kind of lives, and that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go. You started to touch a little bit on maybe the image of a philanthropist, of someone, and the fact that there is a public interest of the private actions of people, and that the public interest is connected to the tax code, which gives you a tax deduction for charitable donations that people make. But that there's discussion around how people should give, and using the tax code or using the law to impact that. Help us understand maybe the background of why would we have put, as a country, why would we have put a tax deduction in there in the first place? What was the idea? What was the founding idea behind the government saying, or the people saying, look, if you're going to give money away, we're going to encourage that. We're going to give you an incentive to do that by giving you a tax deduction. Why did they decide that in the first place?
Well, again, going back to, a lot of what we've been talking about in this conversation, our country was built on the idea of private voluntary association and the right of people to pursue their dreams. And I think, we do want to encourage people to engage in their communities and to find solutions to problems outside of the government. And so we want to incentivize that. And I think that's a positive. What we're starting to keep our eye on and we're concerned about, and something that's been going on for a long time, frankly, is the idea that incentive that's provided then means that the money belongs to the government, or that the government should have, an outsized influence on how that money is spent. And that's not really the purpose. In fact, it's counter to the purpose of why we want a strong civil society with lots of, private voluntary associations outside of the government. So I think that's what works us.
So you talk a little bit more about that. We've talked a lot about philanthropy or philanthropists, but you've talked about kind of community organizations, some other. Build on that a little bit. Help me understand, when you say that, what sort of organizations are you talking about? Is it like a United Way or Salvation Army, or is it a Lions Club or something else along those lines? Help us understand that.
Yeah, all of the things you just mentioned, plus your synagogues, your churches, and also, educational organizations, schools, anything where really it's outside of the government, but it's people finding, community, finding ways to solve problems, finding ways to associate with one another, express their values, any institution like that. And it's everything you mentioned and more. Lots of different types of charitable organizations throughout the country.
And that's what makes our society great, because there's so many. I remember my kids, when they'd go to universities, they'd say, there's a club for anything. You can get involved in anything you want. You just give us a mission, 2 or 3 people, you're a club. Make it happen. And that's what I look around our community here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I see so many amazing people that step up and try to fill the gap. And I just think that's a critical element for how communities created, that sense of community being created. So, but let's understand, you have talked about and you've written about the interest that some have in influencing or using the law to influence how somebody else might give. Help me understand what, I think for many in our audience, they go, well, what do you mean? This has been tax deduction has been there for years and years. This is the simplest thing. It's one thing we probably all understand about the tax code, So what are some of the things that are being discussed that somebody like you as the CEO of the Philanthropy Roundtable would be going, well, there's things we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, unfortunately, despite the fact that, again, 2020 was a record-breaking year in giving, we saw, $500 billion going to charity. Some people, activists, believe that people should be doing more. People should be giving on their timeline, or people should be giving to certain types of charities over others. It's a really top-down approach, and unfortunately, it will lead to, in the end, in our opinion, less money going to charitable causes. And that's what concerns us. So we see things like efforts for donor disclosure, which are really just efforts to potentially shame, potentially cancel donors based on what causes they invest in, if it's not on the, quote unquote, approved list. A lot of people have faced retaliation. for giving to certain causes, and many donors give privately for very good reason, either humility, fear of retaliation, because of deeply held religious beliefs that encourage private giving. So we're very concerned about these efforts to force donors to to disclose everything to the public about what they're doing. It's really not something that is appropriate. And thankfully, we have the Supreme Court case from last year that upholds that right of donors to give privately. But we know we'll see more and more efforts to continue that. So the Roundtable is working hard to push back against those efforts. We also see, efforts at the federal level to target certain vehicles for giving. One is, donor-advised funds. So, those are really flexible tools that donors really like to use because they allow them a lot of flexibility, less administrative burden. We see people trying to force these tools into, giving on a certain timeline, only giving in a certain way. We see private foundations targeted, not able to give through those vehicles anymore, which unfortunately would really have a huge effect because during the pandemic, a lot of private foundations used donor-advised funds to pool their funding to get money out more quickly into communities. So it's things like that will be hurt. And that bill that we're particularly watching at the federal level is the King-Grassley bill, or the ACE Act. And it is targeting both donor-advised funds and private foundations. And again, this is going to end up hurting people on the ground who are in need. And that's why we're concerned about. We want to spark more generosity and encourage more giving, not, force people to give on a certain timeline or in a certain way, which ultimately means less money going into charitable causes.
Yeah, interesting. Now, you've said a lot there to unpack. I would think for many of us, when you respond to the United Way, or when you give to the Salvation Army or some of these other community organizations that we talked about, or your local school or church or synagogue, that you're not thinking about the legal framework of this or the policy issues of this. So you talk about things like donor disclosure. I said, well, okay, I gave to my church. What? Do they have to, disclose me as a church member or a donor? Never thought about that. You're giving out of, as we said earlier, an expression of value. So that's a pretty interesting element. I'll go to donor advised funds next, but talk about that idea that at some point, because foundations and many charitable activities have a lot of tax reporting and filing and disclosures. There's a lot of that, but there are certainly some other organizations that don't. Help our audience understand maybe that difference a little bit more.
Right. So private foundations are required to file a 990-PF, which discloses their giving for the year. I have, having run a private foundation, have done quite a few.
You know all about that, don't you?
Know all about that. That being said, there were times where, as a private foundation, where we would give to a donor-advised fund because for very good reason. Sometimes it was personal safety. We were giving to an organization, for instance, to fight extremism or terrorism. And unfortunately, that can get you on a list of being, targeted by terrorists. Sure. So it's kind of a scary thing. So that is one reason we would give in that way and give through a donor-advised fund. We also had some giving that was a little bit out of the ordinary, and we didn't want to receive unsolicited requests from similar places because it wasn't typical. We didn't want to signal the wrong thing to the community by disclosing that type of gift. So private foundations use donor-advised funds for privacy reasons or other reasons as well. This bill will not allow that to continue, which is part of what concerns us. In terms of individual donors, you can give anonymously. There are, obviously donor advised funds allow that in I think, add an extra layer of protection in doing that, because sometimes the organization itself doesn't know who advised that gift. So it kind of protects you from, being disclosed even to the organization itself. The Supreme Court case last year was about Schedule Bs, which are filed by an organization and list major contributors. That is disclosed, but it can only be requested by certain parties if there's a very compelling reason to do so. So if there's criminal activity involved, or there are certain reasons why that can be requested. And we saw some states trying to request it for arbitrary reasons. And that's what the Supreme Court case was all about, was saying, you can't do that. You can't request it for no reason. There has to be a compelling reason to request that information. So we're really encouraged to see the Supreme Court uphold that right of donors, of individual donors, but it's something to just continue to watch, because states will continue to push that issue, and it'll have to be challenged over and over again.
It seems to me, though, isn't this an interesting connection? We're talking about privacy rights in so many aspects. We're doing so many things to respect people's privacy, whether it's in medical or technology or whatever. But this would seem to be kind of going against that grain, wouldn't it? That where you give, whether it is time, talent, in this case it would be treasure, that disclosing for a non-compelling reason would seem to fly in the face of the direction of so many other things. Am I missing that?
No, I think that's very true, and I think it is it's just a misguided way to think about this, and unfortunately, we do see. I think it ties in with some of the broader cultural issues that we're facing as a country. The idea that capitalism and wealth creation are negative things, and that we have that we're trying to sort of bring down those people or out and shame those people, and really force them into the public square. I think that's the sort of reasoning behind it, and it's very concerning.
Yeah, it sure would be. And so just a reminder, we're talking with Elise Westhoff, the CEO and president of the Philanthropy Roundtable, about charity and the role it plays in America, the significance of it. We were just talking about the privacy aspects of it, but let me explore just a little bit more with regards to this donor-advised funds. So I think let me do a couple things. One, we've been talking a lot about public policy issues and the fact that charitable giving is built into our tax code. And there's a lot of policy aspects, which would suggest to me that people have been thinking about the positive or potentially some of the negative things that people would use in charity to mask inappropriate activities or to try to take advantage of the tax law. It would appear that there's been a lot of disclosure and information in appropriate but limited ways to make sure that people don't abuse this right in the tax code in the past. Would that be accurate to kind of say that there's been enough? There is a lot of reporting. There are things that have to be done in that regard. Is that somewhat accurate?
Yes, and there are limitations to what public charities are allowed to do, right? So, they are not allowed to participate in political activity. And I think some of the criticism you see, and by the way, this isn't all coming from one side. I think there are, the left and the right have contributed in this criticism. And I think some of it, is a really fair discussion to have. At what point do you cross over into political territory? Because that is not the role of a public charity, to be involved in politics. And, in the last, when we see organizations that are, for instance, there to get out the vote, but they're only targeting areas with their own political party, that gets a little on the edge of, well, hold on a minute. Are you trying to get more people involved in the voting process? or are you trying to win an election? Because that's where it's to sort of hit the line. And I think there is something fair to criticize there.
Well, I love that you've touched this and you've kept the discussion above a political or a left or right issue. And that's really important. In all the discussions that we try to have here, we're trying to look at it and understand different perspectives and get to the higher leveled issue of, of ideas of privacy, of community engagement and involvement, and recognize that both sides will try to use different laws for their advantage and to the disadvantage of the other. So when you're talking about these things, I really appreciate that you are looking at it in such a broad perspective. And that's why an organization like the Philanthropy Roundtable is so important in this debate, because it joins with people across the political spectrum. Because people across the political spectrum have become very successful and have given money, whether it's at a large level or a modest level. That it's not driven by their politics, it's driven by their values. Is that what you see?
Absolutely. And, I always say this, but I would protect anyone's right to give privately, whether they were giving to a pro-life organization or Planned Parenthood. It is... Right. Or anything along the spectrum. It is a fundamental right. And, I think it doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you're on. It goes beyond that. We will still fight to protect that. And on this issue, we have partners all across, to your point, all across the political ideological spectrum that work with us to fight for this right, because they know it is fundamental to the American tradition of philanthropy.
I love that. We didn't talk about a political side of giving. We talked about it as an American. These ideas are touch everybody. So let's dive into that. So thank you for unpacking that, because there's a lot of policy issues here, and especially if I can do one more thing, help us with donor-advised funds. So this is a way for donors of all levels, $10, $100, to kind of give towards a fund that's mission-oriented. Am I understanding that correctly?
So donor-advised funds, you'll find a lot of different types of them. They are charitable accounts. You will find ones that are mission-oriented. You will find ones that are kind of community foundations in communities. You will find ones that are housed at big banks, it's more of the tool itself. It's a charitable account. It allows a donor to give very flexibly to organizations privately if they so choose. It is it's just a vehicle for giving. A private foundation can be very difficult to set up, and not everyone can afford it. And, it's really for donors who have, a significant amount of money to invest. Donor advised funds are for anyone. You can open one at some places for $100. There's no minimum. But they allow people to say, I want to invest in charitable giving, because all of the money that goes into donor advised funds must go to a public charity. It's irrevocably designated for a public charity. And it allows people to say, maybe I want to do that all at once. Maybe I want to do that over a period of years and treat it almost like a private foundation would, where they're distributing over a period of time. Maybe you want to accumulate some money in the donor advised fund so that you can do something big for your alma mater or for a hospital. You can set up a scholarship at some point. So it's a really flexible vehicle. You get a tax benefit up front, but you can give flexibly over a period of time. And the administrative costs are much lower than setting up a private foundation. So it's a vehicle we want to see a lot more of, and we are seeing a lot more of. It's tremendously popular. They're growing just leaps and bounds over the years because of this flexibility that it allows donors.
Yeah, that very helpful. Thank you for that. Flexibility and accessibility, as you've said. When we talk about philanthropy, you may think of the Rockefellers or the Carnegie, all these names, Gates or others, which is great. But it's also people who are giving $10, $100, $1,000. They've worked their whole lives for things. They're very focused on something, and this is a vehicle and a way to do it. So as we kind of build off of that, I think for our audience and for the mission of the Philanthropy Roundtable, we just want to encourage giving. And it's, I think, one of the barriers, or I wonder if one of the barriers that happens is people say, boy, these problems are big, what can I do? And I would like to say, whatever you can do, do something. Is that kind of how you talk about and think about things as well?
Oh, absolutely. I think, again, going back to the pandemic, this was just a great illustration of what happens during times of crisis in our country. I can just give a personal anecdote. I had a young family member, cousin of mine, second cousin, who set up a nonprofit to sew medical gowns when there weren't enough medical gowns, in the hospitals. And she and her friends all got together, and they were doing virtual school, and they had extra time, and so they started sewing gowns, and they got more people to do it. That's neighbor helping neighbor. Those are the kinds of stories that were really inspiring to see during the pandemic and during really any time of crisis. And not only is it fulfilling for the people on the receiving end, it's very fulfilling for the person doing the work, because it feels like in a time of crisis, you often feel lost. What can I do? You feel hopeless. And this is a way to actually put that hopelessness into action and make a difference. And that's something that I think brings joy and happiness to the people who are givers and the people who are receiving. So it's a wonderful thing to see. And no matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter. You can find a way to be involved and to help people who are in need.
I love that story. You're spot on. I'll share just another one. And so many happened here locally in Grand Rapids in a similar way. But one of the things we did at Amway was, a lot of folks in our personal care manufacturing said, we want to make hand sanitizer. We don't know how to make hand sanitizer. We're going to figure it out. We're going to switch our machines over. And everybody involved in the manufacturing process, the scientists, everyone jumped to it. And within I think 20 or 30 days, we were doing that and delivering it. Nobody thought about, is this a good tax thing or not? Nobody thought about what's the legal ramifications, certainly product safety, but they just wanted to give. It was just in their hearts. And just like your cousin just wanted to give. And people were, at churches and community centers across were sewing masks and doing things. And so while there was a lot of challenge with the pandemic, like you said, giving increased. You see that. So let's celebrate that. How do you celebrate that at the Philanthropy Roundtable or in this space? Do you have a chance to kind of just celebrate and recognize and cheer people on and encourage people at all levels to be givers?
Absolutely. I mean, we love celebrating stories like that, and stories big and small, really, of people who are participating and giving. We try to, just incorporate that as much as we can into, our website and other ways that we communicate with our donors and people and the public, the general public, and really lift up the exceptional organizations that maybe you don't know about, maybe you don't hear about because they're not the ones that are out. They don't have maybe the budget to go out and toot their own horn, but they're doing exceptional work. And we try to find those diamonds in the rough and really bring them to our community who's looking for opportunities to invest in great causes, either through our events or webinars or different, other ways that we communicate. We love stories because that's what brings all of these concepts to life. And that's what, and really that's what a strong civil society is about, is finding those excellent organizations, those truly wonderful human beings who are giving because they're passionate, because they believe in what they're doing, and who are really helping the people in need on the ground. And that's what all of us who are involved in philanthropy are here to do. And it's really inspiring to see.
That's the inspiration that we have to take away. And maybe as we kind of bring this discussion to a bit of a close, this idea of a civil society, of building community and a sense of belonging, the foundational aspect is that it's not, you don't look outside of your community for that to happen. You look inside of your community. You look to your neighbor, and you look to people around you who are closest to the challenge. One of the things I've always celebrated as you talk about this, and what I've noticed in charity is you have some that they give kind of out of obligation, but you have others that are starting and they're new, and they're if I could say from a business perspective, their entrepreneurial spirit in this space is just infectious. They've given up everything else to be able to help their neighbors, and they found a new way to do it better and to get better results and have better impact. Do you have any stories, or can you give us a perspective on how you see that? Because it's so much more than just money. It's people's hearts.
Oh, absolutely. I just started a new series called Doers to Donors, and it's talking about the entrepreneurial spirit of Americans and how they bring that to their philanthropy. So people who have built businesses who are now giving their money away voluntarily. And, my first guest was one of my heroes, Bernie Marcus, the co-founder of the Home Depot. And hearing him talk about the entrepreneurial ways he thinks about his giving, but also his passion for philanthropy. I mean, this is something that he wakes up thinking about and goes to bed thinking about, is how to help people in need. And the things that he has done with his philanthropy, to give you a couple of examples, he has thought a lot about how to help our nation's heroes, our veterans, and really is concerned about the crisis of mental health and within that particular community. And the innovation and fresh ideas that he has brought to that space, to helping people who have traumatic brain injury, PTSD, depression, who the suicide epidemic that is facing the veteran community, he has pioneered a whole new way of thinking about how to help people who are struggling in that space. And not only will it help veterans, it will help people, across the country. So he's developed these new models and new ways of thinking. And it's simply because of his passion. And because, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, these are people who have come here with nothing and have built so much, and they want other people to experience the American dream the way that they have. And so his passion around that is infectious. And I hope anyone who's interested will check out my interview with Bernie, because it was he's truly an extraordinary human being.
That's fantastic. Check it out. Doers to Donors. And I would suggest everyone listening, everyone in this country is a doer, and they have that heart to be a donor. And that's the message I think we're trying to get through here, that there's a special role for people to seek out an opportunity to impact and touch the lives of other people, to help them achieve their potential. And that's what we're talking about. That's what the Philanthropy Roundtable does. That's what Elise Westhoff has done in her life and is doing in her leadership there. And Elise, this has just been a wonderful time of learning. There's a lot to it. It's hard to be a giver. There's a lot of policy issues around it. It's in the public space, but it's still a matter of a person's heart and giving. So maybe share with us some of your thoughts about your last words of encouragement for us about how to engage in this space, how to share, how to give with our time, talent, and treasure, and how to really celebrate and make an impact.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Philanthropy, charitable giving is all about your heart. So the first place to start is what makes you passionate and what makes you excited. And then, again, look around you and think about the problems that you see and how those relate to your passions and your strengths and what you what you feel you can contribute, whether it's time, talent, treasure, volunteering. One of the most meaningful experiences for me has been my decision to become a mentor for a youth in the foster care system. And the experience that you get from doing that, the learning you experience from doing that, of really engaging humbly with a person who has really walked in different shoes than you have, is a truly inspiring experience and something that you can learn so much from. So I would encourage everyone to think about what makes them passionate and excited, and what their values are, and finding an organization where you can give of your time, talent, or treasure. And I promise that you'll receive more than you give.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for those words of wisdom. Elise Westhoff, President and CEO of the Philanthropy Roundtable. Elise, thank you so much for your time and engaging with us and helping us understand this space. And thank you for your leadership and your encouragement and your energy to encourage us all to be doers and donors all at the same time. We'd love to have you back and keep this conversation going, because we want to keep America giving and touching each other along the way, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Elise. And thank you all for joining us on Believe. Just a wonderful conversation about how we can connect with our neighbors, neighbor to neighbor. Wonderful opportunities here. So thank you for joining us on Believe, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Thanks, everybody.